Jake Miller wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag that had seen better days. The cloth was more oil than fabric at this point, but it did the job. His repair shop on Station Kepler 9's lower docks was finally empty after a long day of fixing broken equipment that most galactic technicians wouldn't even bother with. Too old, they'd say. Too much work for too little profit. But Jake didn't mind. Fixing things was what he did. What he'd always done, even as a kid back on Earth, taking apart his mom's kitchen appliances just to see how they worked. She'd been furious every time, but his dad had just laughed and handed him a screwdriver. The station's lower docks were quiet tonight. Just the constant hum of life support systems keeping everyone alive in the cold vacuum of space, and the occasional clang of cargo loaders moving shipments in the distance. Jake glanced at the time display on his workbench. Almost midnight. Time to lock up, grab some instant noodles from the vending machine and collapse into bed. He was reaching for the door controls when he heard it. A soft, choked sob that made him freeze. A small figure stood in his doorway, illuminated by the flickering lights of the corridor outside. At first, Jake thought maybe it was a human child, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized this kid was definitely not from Earth. She was barely 3 feet tall, with shimmering silver scales covering her body that seemed to pulse and shift colors with her emotions. Right now, those scales were a distressed purple-gray that made Jake's heart clench. In her small arms, she struggled to hold something heavy. An android. But not just any android, this thing looked like it had been through a war. Sparks occasionally sputtered from exposed wiring, its metal chassis was dented and torn in places, and its optical sensors were completely dark. Lifeless. "Please," the little alien said, her voice trembling as she spoke in heavily accented galactic common. Every word seemed to take effort. "Please fix friend. Friend broken." Jake's first instinct was to say no. He was tired. He wanted sleep. And this android looked beyond repair, the kind of job that would take days and might not even be possible. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the kid's scales kept shifting to darker and darker colors. Maybe it was the tears glistening in her large alien eyes. Jake knelt down slowly, getting to her level. Up close, he could see she was shaking slightly, whether from fear or exhaustion or both, he couldn't tell. "Hey there," he said softly, the way he used to talk to his daughter when she was small and scared. "What's your name, kid?" "Alice," she whispered. Her scales dimmed even more, turning almost completely gray now. Friend is Pip. We play together every day. Pip tells me stories about faraway places. Pip makes me laugh when I am sad." Her voice cracked on the last words and Jake felt something twist in his chest. "Accident happened," Alice continued, setting the android down carefully on Jake's workbench. "Bad people came. They wanted to hurt people. Pip pushed me away from danger. Took the blast. Now Pip won't wake up. Other technicians say Pip is dead. Say by new android. But I don't want new android. I want Pip." Jake examined the android more closely under his work light. The damage was extensive, way worse than he'd initially thought. The memory banks were corrupted, visible cracks running through the data storage units. Servo systems were completely fried, melted in places from what looked like an energy weapon. Neural pathways were scrambled, the delicate quantum processors that gave the android its personality all jumbled together like someone had shaken up a puzzle box. This would take days of work. Maybe weeks. And he probably didn't have even half the parts he'd need. Most of this tech was old, ancient by galactic standards. They didn't even make these models anymore. "I don't know if I can," Jake started to say, ready to let her down gently to explain that some things were just too broken to fix. But then he made the mistake of looking at her face. Those large, luminous eyes were fixed on him with a hope that was rapidly fading. Her scales were now the color of old ash. She looked so small, so devastated, clutching the edge of his workbench like it was the only thing keeping her standing. And suddenly, Jake wasn't seeing an alien child in a repair shop on some forgotten space station. He was seeing his own daughter, Amanda, 12 years old now, living back on Earth with her mother. He barely got to see her anymore. Maybe twice a year if he was lucky and saved enough for the travel fare. He remembered the last time he'd video called her, how she'd asked when he was coming home, and he hadn't known what to say. If Amanda had a friend who got hurt, who everyone else said was beyond saving, what would she want him to do? Jake surprised himself with what came out of his mouth next. "Tell you what," he said, standing up and grabbing his toolkit. "Leave Pip with me. Come back tomorrow morning around 8. I'll see what I can do." LSS's scales immediately brightened, shifting toward a hopeful blue-green. "You try? You promise try?" Jake looked at the mangled android, at the impossible job ahead of him, at the kid's desperate face. He thought about all the sensible reasons to say no. And then he thought about Amanda. I promise I'll try my best. LSS's scales exploded into bright yellow and orange. Colors Jake guessed meant happiness or relief. She reached out suddenly and hugged his leg, her small arms barely making it around. Thank you, human Jake. Thank you so much. After she left, carefully making her way down the corridor and disappearing around a corner, Jake turned back to the android on his workbench. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long breath. What did I just get myself into? He muttered to nobody. What Jake didn't notice, being focused entirely on the android, was the nearly invisible surveillance drone hovering near his ceiling vent. Its advanced camouflage made it blend perfectly with the shadows and metal pipes. He also didn't see the elegant hooded figure watching through the window of the cafe across the docking corridor. She sat alone at a corner table, her face hidden, but her attention fixed entirely on his shop. Around her, scattered at other tables, were beings who looked like casual travelers and tired dock workers. But if you watched carefully, you'd notice they moved with unusual precision, their eyes constantly scanning, hands never far from concealed weapons. They were guards. Elite guards. And they were protecting someone very, very important. But Jake knew none of this. He just rolled up his sleeves, grabbed his strongest coffee and got to work. Jake didn't bother going to bed. He just grabbed the strongest coffee he had, the stuff that tasted like motor oil but kept you awake for days, and got straight to work. The android lay on his workbench under the bright white lights, looking more like a corpse than a machine. But Jake had seen worse. At least that's what he told himself. The first hour was just assessment. Jake carefully opened access panels, photographed everything with his old camera, and made notes on a paper pad. Yeah, actual paper. Most people in the galaxy thought humans were crazy for still using it, but Jake liked having something physical. Screens could glitch. Paper didn't lie. The android's design was incredible. Way more sophisticated than anything he usually worked on. Most of what came through his shop was basic stuff. Cargo hauler engines, broken environmental suits, maybe a navigation computer if he was lucky. But this was art. Every circuit was precisely placed, every connection perfectly calculated. Whoever built this had been a master. But sophisticated didn't mean impossible to fix. That was the difference between Jake and the fancy galactic engineers. They saw an old model and immediately thought, obsolete, replace it. Jake saw potential. The servo casings were cracked beyond repair. He'd need new ones, but good luck finding parts for a model that hadn't been manufactured in 30 years. So Jake did what humans do best, he improvised. He pulled up schematics on his computer, modified them to fit, and fed them into his 3D printer. The machine hummed to life, slowly building new casings layer by layer using a polymer blend he'd mixed himself. While that printed, Jake turned to the neural connections. This was delicate work. Each pathway was thinner than a human hair, and they all connected in specific patterns that created the android's ability to think, to react, to learn. The blast that had damaged Pip had scrambled everything like someone had taken a fork to a bowl of spaghetti. Jake pulled out his magnifying visor and the smallest tools he owned. Then he got to work, hand-wiring each connection, tracing pathways with the kind of patience that would have made a galactic technician lose their mind. They were all about efficiency, speed, getting the job done in the optimal time. Jake didn't care about optimal. He cared about doing it right. His back started aching after 2 hours of hunching over the workbench. His eyes burned from staring through the magnifier. His coffee had gone cold. He didn't care. He kept working. The power core was the biggest headache. The original was a quantum fusion cell, incredibly powerful, incredibly efficient, and incredibly burned out. It looked like someone had microwaved a grape. There was no fixing it, and Jake definitely couldn't afford a replacement even if he could find one. But Jake had been collecting old human tech for years. Stuff that other people threw away or sold for scrap. In a box in the back of his shop, wrapped in protective foam, was a modified human fusion battery he'd been tinkering with for the last 3 years. It was based on old Earth nuclear submarine technology, updated with some tricks he'd learned from various alien tech manuals. It wasn't as powerful as the quantum cell. It wasn't as elegant. But it would work. Jake spent another hour carefully integrating it, rerouting power connections, adjusting voltage regulators. He had to basically rebuild the entire power distribution system. A galactic engineer would have said it was impossible. The systems weren't compatible. The specifications didn't match. Jake made them match. By hour 5 he was running on fumes. His fourth cup of coffee sat untouched, and his stomach growled with hunger he ignored. Because now came the real problem, the part that made him genuinely worried he might fail. The AI matrix. The android's consciousness, its memories, its personality, everything that made Pip actually Pip and not just a walking toaster. The memory banks were corrupted, data scattered across failing storage units like puzzle pieces thrown across a room. Some pieces were damaged. Some were missing entirely. Standard Galactic repair protocol was simple. Wipe everything, install fresh programming, reboot. The android would work perfectly. But it would be a blank slate. It wouldn't remember LSS. Wouldn't remember the games they played, the stories it told her, the way she laughed at its jokes. It would be Pip in body only. And Jake remembered the look in LSS's eyes when she'd said, "I don't want new android. I want Pip." So Jake decided to do something crazy. Something that every repair manual said was impossible. He was going to reconstruct the corrupted data files manually. He pulled up programming interfaces that hadn't been used in centuries. Old Earth code, Python, C++, languages that the galaxy had abandoned when they developed quantum computing. But Jake had learned them from his grandfather, who'd been a programmer back when Earth was still figuring out how to build basic AI. Hour after hour, Jake worked. He patched quantum circuits using classical computing tricks his grandfather had taught him. He built bridges between damaged pathways, rerouting data flow around destroyed sections. He recovered fragments of memories from backup sectors that the galactic scanners had marked as irretrievable. It was like trying to rebuild a shredded photograph with only half the pieces and no picture to reference. But slowly, painfully, it started to come together. By dawn, Jake's shop looked like a disaster zone. Empty coffee cups covered every surface. Failed circuit boards littered the floor. His tools were scattered everywhere. His eyes felt like sandpaper, and his hands trembled slightly from exhaustion and too much caffeine. But on his workbench, the android's optical sensors suddenly flickered. What? Twice. Then they glowed with steady blue light. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. "Status check," he said, his voice hoarse. There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Then the android spoke, its voice uncertain and hesitant, like someone waking from a long dream. Systems functional. Running diagnostics. Memory core intact. I am Pip." Jake felt tears prick his eyes. He was too tired to be embarrassed about it. "Yeah, buddy. You're Pip." The android's head turned toward him, optical sensors focusing. "Where is LYSS? Is she safe?" There was an attack. I pushed her away from the blast. "Did she get hurt?" Jake couldn't help it. He grinned, exhaustion and relief making him almost giddy. "She's safe. She's completely fine. And she's going to be really, really happy to see you. She brought me here? To you." Pip's voice grew stronger, more confident. "She must have been so worried. I should not have frightened her so badly. You saved her life, Pip. You did good." Across the corridor, in the cafe that never seemed to close, the hooded figure leaned forward in her seat. Her elegant features remained hidden in shadow, but her eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, were fixed intently on Jake's shop. Through her neural link, she reviewed footage that her engineers had been compiling all night. Every action Jake took had been recorded, analyzed, broken down into data. And the reports coming back from her top technicians were all saying the same thing. Impossible. The repair should not have worked. The human's methods violated every efficiency protocol in the Imperial database. He'd ignored standard procedures entirely. Mixed incompatible technologies. Used programming languages so old they weren't even in the archives anymore. By every measure, the android should have suffered catastrophic system failure. Yet it functioned. More than functioned, it remembered. Its personality was intact. Its bond with LYSS preserved. The Empress allowed herself a small smile that no one could see. "Fascinating," she whispered. "Truly fascinating." Jake had managed to catch maybe 2 hours of sleep in his back room before the sound of running footsteps woke him up. He barely had time to splash water on his face before his shop door burst open. LYSS practically flew through the entrance, her scales shifting through colors so fast they looked like a strobe light. Her eyes were wide and hopeful and terrified all at once, like she was afraid to believe what she'd come to find out. Pip stood near the workbench, freshly cleaned and polished. The android turned toward the door and went completely still. "Alice," Pip said softly. That one word broke whatever dam had been holding the little alien back. She let out a cry that was half sob, half laugh, and threw herself across the shop. Pip caught her gently, the way you'd catch something precious and fragile, and lifted her up, spinning her in a slow circle. Pip. Pip remembers Elwes. She was crying now, her small hands touching the android's face like she needed to make sure it was real. Of course I remember you, Pip said, and Jake could hear the warmth in that mechanical voice. You are my friend. You will always be my friend. I remember every story I ever told you. Every game we played. That time you got mud all over the palace gardens and blamed it on the ambassador's pet. I remember all of it. Elwes laughed through her tears, her scales now a brilliant gold that seemed to light up the whole shop. You remember? The technicians said you would forget everything. They said your memory was gone forever. Then I suppose, Pip said gently, we are very fortunate that your mother's technicians were wrong, and that you found Jake. Elwes turned in Pip's arms to look at Jake, who was leaning against his workbench trying to keep his own emotions in check. He told himself he was just fixing a broken machine. But watching this reunion, seeing the pure joy on that kid's face, it hit him harder than he'd expected. Thank you. Elwes said, her voice breaking with emotion. Thank you, human Jake. You gave me back my friend. Jake cleared his throat, trying to sound casual even though his voice came out rough. Just take care of each other, okay? That's all the thanks I need. Elwes climbed down from Pip's arms and approached Jake, digging into a small pouch attached to her belt. How many credits? Mother gave me money for the repair. She said important work deserves proper payment. Jake looked at the pouch, then at the kid's earnest face, then at Pip standing protectively nearby. He thought about the hours of work, the rare parts he'd used, the sheer complexity of what he'd accomplished. Any other technician would charge thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. Kid, just give me enough to cover the materials, Jake said. Call it 20 credits. Elwes' scales flickered with confusion, shifting to a puzzled orange. 20? But the repair is worth. The technician said this job would cost at least 5,000 credits if it was even possible. 20 credits. That's my price. But. Look, Jake said, kneeling down to her level again. You were scared. Your friend was hurt. You trusted me to help. That's worth more than credits. Just promise me you'll take care of Pip and we're even. Elwes stared at him for a long moment, then carefully counted out 20 credits and placed them in his palm. Then she hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Humans are strange, she whispered. But I think I like them. Jake watched them leave, Elwes chattering excitedly to Pip about everything she wanted to do now that they were together again. His shop felt emptier somehow after they were gone. He got back to his normal work, fixing a broken navigation computer, replacing power cells in an environmental suit. Life returned to normal. For 3 days. Then his world exploded. Jake was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning cargo loader engine when they appeared. No warning. No door opening. Just sudden shimmer in the air, and then there were 6 figures standing in his shop wearing armor that looked like it was made from liquid starlight. It moved and flowed across their bodies like water, but Jake had no doubt it was harder than any metal he'd ever seen. Their weapons were beyond anything he'd encountered, and he'd seen plenty during humanity's rough integration into galactic society. These weren't projectile weapons or even energy rifles. They looked like they could unmake reality itself. Jake dropped his wrench. It clanged on the floor, way too loud in the sudden silence. Jake Miller, the lead guard said. The voice was synthesized, emotionless, coming from somewhere inside that flowing armor. You are summoned to the eternal radiance. Come peacefully or be compelled. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth went dry. What's this about? I haven't done anything wrong. I pay my taxes, I have all my licenses. You repaired property of the imperial household, the guard interrupted. The Empress wishes to speak with you. This is not a request. The Empress. The actual Empress. Jake felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. The Empress, he repeated stupidly. As in, the ruler of the VRYX Empire? That Empress. There is only one Empress. You will come now. Jake didn't really have a choice. The guards surrounded him and suddenly the world lurched. Teleportation. He'd heard about it but never experienced it. His stomach tried to turn itself inside out, and when his vision cleared, he wasn't in his shop anymore. He was standing in a transport bay that was bigger than his entire station level. And through the massive windows he could see it, the eternal radiance. Calling it a ship felt wrong. It was a city. A country. A world unto itself. It stretched for miles in every direction, an impossible structure of crystal and metal and things Jake didn't have names for. Parts of it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, flickering between states of being in ways that hurt to look at. The guards escorted him through corridors that made him feel like an ant. The ceilings were so high they disappeared into artificial clouds. The walls were carved from materials that seemed alive, pulsing with inner light. He passed beings from hundreds of species. Some he recognized, most he didn't. All of them stopped to stare at the human being marched through their halls by Imperial guards. Finally, they reached a door that was easily 50 feet tall. It opened silently and Jake's legs nearly gave out. The throne room was beyond anything he could have imagined. The chamber was so massive that weather systems formed near the ceiling. Thousands of beings filled galleries that rose up and up until they disappeared into mist. The floor looked like compressed starlight, and his boots left no marks on its perfect surface. And at the center, on a throne carved from what looked like frozen gravity itself, sat the Empress. She was beautiful in a way that terrified him. Her form shifted subtly between states, solid, energy, something in between. Her presence pressed down on him like physical weight, making it hard to breathe. Jake had to lock his knees to keep from collapsing. Human Jake Miller. Her voice didn't come through his ears. It resonated through his entire body, through his bones, through his thoughts. You repaired property belonging to the Crown Princess of the VRYX Empire. Crown Princess. Those words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. That little girl. OSS. She was the Crown Princess. His knees started to buckle and then he saw her. Standing beside the throne in formal robes that shimmered like liquid mercury, looking so different from the scared child who'd stumbled into his shop. Pip stood at her side and Elwes was waving at him, a huge smile on her face. "Oh no," Jake whispered, the pieces finally clicking together. "Oh no no no." Jake felt like he might pass out. The throne room was spinning slightly, or maybe that was just his brain trying to process the fact that he'd fixed the Crown Princess's android in his grimy repair shop while wearing a shirt with coffee stains on it. "You appear distressed, Jake Miller," the Empress observed. And was that amusement in her voice? Could an all-powerful galactic ruler find humor in watching a human mechanic have a mental breakdown? "Your Majesty, I didn't know, I had no idea she was," Jake stammered, his words tripping over each other. "If I'd known she was the princess I would've, I still would've helped, but I would've been more." "Peace," the Empress commanded, and the single word hit Jake like a physical force. His mouth snapped shut. His racing thoughts went quiet. The whole throne room seemed to hold its breath. "You are not here for punishment," the Empress continued, and Jake felt some of the tension leave his body. "You are here because you accomplished something my empire's finest engineers declared impossible." She made a gesture with one elegant hand, and suddenly the air around the throne room filled with holographic displays. They floated everywhere, dozens of them showing Jake in his shop. There he was, working through the night, hunched over his workbench. The footage showed him from multiple angles that meant those surveillance drones had been watching everything. Each action he'd taken had notes beside it and alien text that shifted to English as he looked at it. Technical analysis, efficiency ratings, probability of success calculations. All of them marked his methods with red warnings and error messages. Jake felt exposed, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. But the Empress didn't sound angry. She sounded curious. 3 weeks ago, the Empress began, her voice filling the massive chamber, there was an assassination attempt on the Imperial convoy. Another hologram materialized, this one much larger. It showed a line of elegant ships traveling through space. Beautiful vessels that looked more like art than technology. "Separatist forces attacked while we traveled to a treaty negotiation," the Empress continued. "They wanted to stop the peace talks. They wanted to send a message that the Empire could be hurt." The hologram showed the attack. Small fighter craft appearing from nowhere, weapons firing. Explosions blooming like deadly flowers. Jake watched one blast tear through a ship's shields, saw debris flying. Then the angle changed, showing the interior of a ship. A corridor. OSS looking terrified, running with Pip close behind. And then an explosion ripped through the wall. Pip moved faster than Jake thought possible, grabbing OSS and throwing her backward while putting its own body between her and the blast. The android's chassis crumpled under the impact. Sparks flew. Metal tore. But OSS tumbled away, shielded, alive. Jake's throat tightened watching it. That android had sacrificed itself without hesitation. "Pip saved my daughter's life," the Empress said quietly. The android was severely damaged, but OSS survived without a scratch. The hologram faded and the Empress continued. "My engineers attempted repairs immediately. They are the best in the Empire. Masters of their craft. They examined Pip and determined the damage was extensive but reparable. She paused, and her form seemed to shimmer with something that might have been frustration. However, their protocols required a complete memory wipe to restore functionality. The AI matrix was too damaged to preserve. Standard procedure is to install fresh programming. The android would function perfectly, better than before even, but it would not remember. Eloise spoke up then, her voice small in the vast chamber but steady. I told Mother that Pip is my friend, not just a machine. Friends remember each other. They remember the time you spent together, the things you talked about, the promises you made. Without memories, Pip would just be an empty shell that looked like my friend. The little princess's scales flickered with emotion. Mother said her engineers needed time to find another solution. But I could see in their faces they didn't think there was one. They kept saying impossible, and irretrievable data corruption, and catastrophic memory cascade failure. The Empress nodded slowly. I had other matters demanding my attention. Emergency security protocols. Investigating the attack. Determining who had betrayed us because the Separatists had known our exact route. A galaxy teetering toward war. I could not spend days watching engineers attempt the impossible. Another hologram appeared. This one showed LYSS watching from a distance as Jake worked in his shop. The timestamp showed it was 2 days before she'd brought Pip to him. Jake was fixing something small, an old music box. An elderly alien woman stood nearby, wringing her hands nervously. In the hologram, Jake got the music box working. It played a soft, tinny melody. The woman's face lit up with joy and she reached for her credit chip. But Jake waved her off, closing her fingers around the chip and saying something the hologram couldn't quite catch. She chose you, the Empress said, looking at Jake with those overwhelming eyes, because she observed your compassion. She watched you repair that woman's music box, a worthless item by any economic measure, and refuse payment because she could not afford it. My daughter, desperate and distraught, gambled that a human might succeed where my empire failed. The Empress leaned forward on her throne, and suddenly all her attention focused entirely on Jake. It felt like standing in front of a star. The weight of her regard made his knees weak, but he forced himself to stand straight. Explain to me, Jake Miller, how you succeeded, the Empress commanded. My engineers have analyzed your methods extensively. They inform me that your approach was inefficient, primitive, illogical. You used obsolete programming languages from your homeworld. You improvised parts that should not have been compatible. You violated every single repair protocol in the Galactic database. By all calculations, the android should have suffered catastrophic system failure within seconds of activation. She paused, her form rippling with something that might have been confusion or admiration or both. Yet it functions. More than functions, it thrives. Remembers. It maintains its bond with my daughter. How? Jake swallowed hard. He could feel thousands of eyes on him from the galleries above. Beings from hundreds of worlds, all watching the human try to explain himself. This was probably the most important moment of his entire life. What he said next could change how the galaxy saw humanity, or confirm every negative stereotype they already believed. He took a deep breath. Your Majesty, I'm not an expert in galactic technology, Jake said, his voice stronger than he felt. I'm just a mechanic from Earth who fixes things in a rundown shop on a forgotten station. But back on Earth we have a saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it is broke, fix it, till it isn't. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Jake heard murmurs in a dozen languages he didn't understand. He pushed forward, his confidence growing as he found his footing. Your engineers, they're brilliant, I'm sure. They saw a broken machine. They followed their protocols, procedures designed for efficiency and replacement. That's how the galaxy works, right? Everything optimized, everything by the book. Jake gestured toward where LYSS stood. But I didn't see a broken machine. I saw LYSS's friend. And when you're fixing something that matters to someone, really matters, you don't just replace it. You restore it. You bring it back. He pointed to the holograms still floating around the room. I didn't have the right parts, so I made them work anyway. I took what I had, modified it, adapted it. I couldn't reconstruct the memory banks using standard methods because I don't know standard methods. So I used old Earth programming, languages my grandfather taught me, techniques that the galaxy forgot about centuries ago. Jake's voice grew stronger. It took longer. It wasn't elegant. It probably looked crazy to anyone watching. But I wasn't trying to build a perfect machine according to some efficiency standard. I was trying to bring Pip back, all of Pip, memories included, because that's what LYSS needed. The throne room had gone completely silent. Even the ambient noise seemed to have stopped. Humans, Jake said quietly, we're stubborn. We don't accept impossible. We make do with what we have. We adapt, we improvise, we find another way. That android wasn't just technology to LSS. It was her companion, her protector, her friend. I couldn't let her lose that. Retrice. The Empress rose from her throne, and Jake felt the entire chamber hold its breath. It was like watching a force of nature move, terrifying and beautiful at the same time. She descended the steps slowly, each movement deliberate, and as she came closer, something changed. Her form began to solidify, to condense. The overwhelming presence that had pressed down on Jake like a physical weight started to ease. By the time she stood in front of him, she transformed into something more comprehensible, more human-sized. Jake realized with shock that she was actually quite small, barely taller than he was. All that power, all that terrifying presence had been amplified somehow. Without it, she just looked like a person. An incredibly important person wearing robes that probably cost more than his entire station, but still, a person. Jake Miller, she said, her voice now coming through his ears normally instead of vibrating through his bones. I offer you a position. The crowd erupted. Shocked murmurs rippled through the galleries like a wave. Beings turned to each other, speaking rapidly in languages Jake didn't understand. But he could read their body language well enough. They were stunned. Apparently, positions in the imperial household were a big deal. Who knew? Not as an engineer, the Empress continued, ignoring the commotion around them. I have millions of those. They are skilled, efficient, and follow every protocol perfectly. But what I need is something different. Someone who sees problems differently. She paused, considering her words carefully. I want you to be my chief restoration specialist. Your mission would be singular, to fix what others declare broken beyond repair. Not just technology but anything my empire has given up on. Treaties that have failed. Relationships between species that have fractured. Systems that no longer work. Artifacts that hold cultural significance but are deemed too damaged to save. You would teach others your approach, this human stubbornness, this refusal to accept impossible. Jake's mind reeled. Your Majesty, I'm honored really, but I'm just a mechanic. I fix cargo loaders and broken coffee makers. I'm not qualified to. You fixed what my best engineers could not, the Empress interrupted gently. That qualifies you for anything in my empire. Jake opened his mouth to protest again, but she held up a hand. You would have a workshop aboard this vessel, she said. Fully equipped with anything you need. A ship of your own for travel. Access to any resources you require, parts, materials, personnel. The authority to go anywhere in my empire and examine any problem you wish to solve. That all sounded incredible, but Jake was thinking about his tiny shop back on the station. His familiar tools. His independence. Could he really give that up to work for? And, the Empress added, glancing toward where LSS stood watching with hopeful eyes, you would be granted diplomatic communication privileges, including unlimited, unrestricted contact with Earth. Your family could visit whenever they wished. All travel expenses covered by the Imperial Treasury. Jake's heart stopped. His daughter. Amanda. He could see Amanda. Not twice a year if he scraped together enough credits, but regularly. She could visit him here. They could actually have a relationship again instead of awkward video calls every few months where she felt like a stranger. I would also, the Empress said, a slight smile playing at her lips, pay you a salary befitting an imperial household position. Substantially more than you earn now, I suspect. Jake felt tears prick his eyes. He didn't even care about the money, though that would be nice. Was Amanda. The chance to be a father again. When do I start? Jake asked, his voice rough with emotion. LSS let out a squeal of delight, her scales flashing brilliant gold. Even Pip seemed to stand a little straighter. The Empress smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. Immediately. 6 months later, Jake stood in his new workshop aboard the Eternal Radiance and still couldn't quite believe this was his life now. The workshop was enormous, about 10 times the size of his old shop. But Jake had made it feel like home. His old workbench from the station had been transported here and sat in the middle of the space, scratches and coffee stains and all. His grandfather's tools hung on the wall in their worn leather case. Even his ancient coffee maker, the one that made coffee that tasted like motor oil but kept you awake for days, had a place of honor on a shelf. But surrounding his familiar things was technology beyond anything he'd imagined. 3D printers that could fabricate at the atomic level. Diagnostic equipment that could scan quantum states. Computer systems with processing power that would have seemed like magic back on Earth. The Empress had kept her word. He had access to anything he needed. Word had spread through the Empire fast. Bring your impossible problems to the human. The one who doesn't accept can't be done. And they came. Well, they came. A delegation from the Krell system had brought him a 1,000-year-old peace treaty, the original document, handwritten on something like parchment. War had broken out again because they couldn't agree on what certain passages meant. Modern copies conflicted. Everyone claimed their version was correct. Jake had spent 3 days searching through what the Empire considered obsolete storage, physical archives that nobody had checked in centuries because everything was supposed to be digitized. He'd found the original treaty in a box marked Historical Curiosities, no practical value. One afternoon of careful translation work, and the conflict was resolved. Turned out both sides had been wrong about what their ancestors had agreed to. An elderly alien from a species Jake couldn't even pronounce the name of had brought him a memory crystal. It held 10 generations of her family's consciousness, thoughts, memories, experiences recorded in a technology so old the Empire had no way to interface with it. The crystal was cracked, data degrading. Every specialist said it was lost forever. Jake had used human neural pattern recognition software, the kind they'd developed back on Earth for mapping brain activity, and somehow, someway, it had been compatible enough to extract and restore the data. The old woman had cried, her translator device barely able to keep up with her gratitude. A colony world administrator had come to him with a problem that had plagued them for 30 years. Resource distribution kept failing. The algorithms said everything should work perfectly, but colonists were constantly short on supplies they needed. Starvation, equipment failures, you name it. Jake had asked one question that apparently nobody had thought of. Did you ask the colonists what they actually need? Turns out the efficiency algorithms were optimized for theoretical average needs. But real people aren't theoretical averages. Some needed more medical supplies because they had chronic conditions. Some needed different food because of allergies or cultural requirements. Some needed specific tools for their actual jobs instead of the standard equipment. Jake had spent 2 weeks on that colony talking to people, making lists, throwing out the algorithms, and creating a distribution system based on actual human, sentient being, needs. Problem solved. His workshop had become more than just a repair center. It had become a teaching space. Dozens of aliens from various species came regularly to learn what they called the human methodology. It wasn't a formal class. Jake just worked and let them watch. He explained his thinking as he went. Why he tried this approach instead of that one. How he adapted when something didn't work. Why sometimes the wrong solution was actually the right one. Creativity over protocol. Adaptation over efficiency. Preservation over replacement. These became his mantras, and slowly his students started to understand. But his favorite visitor was still LSS. The Crown Princess came by his workshop every single day after her lessons, Pip always faithfully at her side. She'd climb up on a stool next to his workbench and watch him work, asking a million questions about everything. Why do you try that way first? How did you know it would work? What happens if you're wrong? Jake answered every question honestly. He showed her his failures, the attempts that didn't work, the dead ends, the times he had to start over completely. He taught her that being wrong wasn't shameful. It was just information. It meant you tried something, learned it didn't work, and now you knew to try something else. Today she brought him something special. A formal portrait of himself, commissioned by the Empress, to hang in the Hall of Distinguished Service. In the painting, Jake wore elaborate imperial robes covered in medals and decorations. Do I really have to wear that? Jake asked, looking at the outfit with horror. He was currently wearing jeans and a shirt that said, "I'm an engineer. I'm always right," that Amanda had sent him last week. Ellis's scales shimmered with barely contained laughter. Only for ceremonies. Mother says you are teaching the Empire something important. That being advanced does not mean we cannot learn from others. She wants to honor you. Jake studied the painting. The artist had captured his face well, but that outfit was something else. Your mom's pretty smart for an empress. She says you are stubborn for a human, Ellis replied, grinning. Kid, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me. Through the workshop windows, the galaxy stretched out an infinite possibility. Jake could see ships coming and going, stars burning in the distance, nebulas painting colors across the void. Somewhere out there was Earth, where Amanda was probably getting ready for her visit next month. Humanity was no longer the primitive newcomers everyone had dismissed. They were the people who refused to give up. The ones who saw value where others saw waste. Who cared more about meaning than efficiency. Who understood that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most advanced one, it was the one made with care. And Jake Miller, A simple mechanic who'd once fixed a little girl's broken friend, had helped change an empire's perspective on what it meant to truly fix something. One stubborn repair at a time.